An old man, shaking and clutching a heavy wooden cane, was cornered by two aggressive park rangers deep in the isolated woods. They thought they had found an easy target for a power trip. They didn't know the cane wasn't for his weakness. It was a handicap for everyone else's safety. The air in the Blood Mountain wilderness of northern Georgia was sharp, carrying the damp, earthy scent of decaying pine needles and incoming rain. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of deeply quiet afternoon where the only sounds were the wind moving through the ancient canopy and the steady, rhythmic thud crunch of a heavy wooden cane striking the trail. Andrew Scott walked with a pronounced limp, his left leg dragging just a fraction of a second behind his right. At 78 years old, Andrew looked like the kind of man the world had comfortably forgotten. He wore a faded red flannel shirt over a thermal Henley well-worn denim and a pair of scuffed Danner boots that had seen decades of mountain trails. A battered canvas Alice Pack military surplus from a bygone era rested on his slightly stooped shoulders. His face was a topography of deep wrinkles, weathered by sun and time, framed by a shock of thinning, stark white hair and a closely cropped silver beard. To anyone passing by, Andrew was just a fragile grandfather, enjoying his twilight years in nature. But beneath the thick flannel Andrew's body was a roadmap of surviving the impossible. Before the civilian world forgot him, he was known as Master Sergeant Scott, a Tier 1 operator who had spent 22 years moving through the darkest, most classified corners of the Cold War. Andrew paused, leaning heavily on his thick oak cane. He took a deep breath, letting the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. He came to this specific remote section of the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest every year on this exact date. It was the anniversary of a mission in the dense jungles of Central America that officially never happened, a mission where two of his closest friends hadn't made it back. He was simply looking for a quiet clearing near a specific rock formation to sit, drink black coffee from his thermos, and remember them. He was about 2 miles off the designated tourist trails, walking a deer path that was technically restricted for seasonal revegetation, though the old wooden sign marking the boundary had rotted and fallen over years ago. Andrew knew the woods better than the animals did. He wasn't hurting the flora, and he certainly wasn't lost. "Hey, hold it right there, Grandpa." The loud, abrasive voice shattered the serene silence of the forest. Andrew didn't flinch. His heart rate didn't spike. Decades of extreme conditioning had wired his nervous system to react to sudden noise, not with a startle but with hyper-focused assessment. He slowly turned, pivoting heavily on his cane, to see 2 men marching up the incline behind him. They were state park rangers, though they carried themselves with the swagger of men who desperately wished they were SWAT officers. The lead ranger, a bulky man in his early 30s with a tight buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, had his hand resting casually on his utility belt right next to his taser. His name tag read D. Russo. Behind him was a leaner, younger ranger with a patchy beard and a nervous, sneering smile. His tag read T. Higgins. Derek Russo and Toby Higgins were notorious among the local hiking community. They were the kind of low-level authority figures who thrived on intimidating weekend campers and writing maximum penalty citations for minor infractions, out here miles away from the main ranger station and any cell phone service. They considered themselves the absolute law. "You deaf old man," Russo barked, closing the distance. He stopped uncomfortably close to Andrew, invading his personal space, trying to use his height and bulk to cast an intimidating shadow. "I said hold it." "I heard you just fine, son," Andrew replied. His voice was gravelly quiet and perfectly calm. "How can I help you?" "Don't call me son," Russo snapped, puffing out his chest. "You're in a restricted revegetation zone. There's a $200 fine for being off the marked trail. And looking at you, I'm guessing you didn't just wander off by accident. What are you doing out here? Poaching digging for artifacts." "I'm taking a walk," Andrew said, his eyes scanning the two men. He noted Rousseau's aggressive posture, the slight tremor of adrenaline in Higgins's hands, the unbalanced way they stood on the uneven terrain. Amateurs, his brain catalogued automatically. Heavy on the right foot, off balance. 30 seconds to neutralize both, if they go lethal. 10 seconds if it's unarmed. Andrew immediately pushed the thought away. He was an old man now. A civilian. He just wanted his coffee and his memories. "Let's see some ID here." Higgins chimed in, stepping out from behind Rousseau to flank Andrew on the right. "Now." Andrew sighed, maintaining his gentle, frail demeanor. "I don't carry my wallet on the trails. Left it in the glove box of my truck at the trailhead. A blue Ford F-150. You can run the plates. The name is Andrew Scott." Rousseau scoffed, exchanging a look with Higgins. No ID wandering in a restricted zone with a military rucksack. You know how many sovereign citizen nut jobs we get out here, cooking meth or setting up illegal camps. "I assure you, Ranger Rousseau, I am not cooking anything," Andrew said, gripping his cane a little tighter. "I am just an old man looking for a quiet place to sit for an hour. If I am in a restricted area, I apologize. I will turn around and head back to the main trail." No harm done. He began to turn around, leaning on the cane, acting exactly like the weary senior citizen they perceived him to be. "I didn't say you could leave," Rousseau growled, stepping laterally to block Andrew's path. The ranger's ego was bruised. The old man wasn't cowering. He wasn't begging or stammering. That quiet, unflappable dignity infuriated Rousseau. "Take the bag off," Rousseau ordered, pointing at the canvas Alice pack. "We're going to search it." Andrew stopped. The air between them seemed to suddenly drop 10 degrees. "No," Andrew said softly. "You are not." "Excuse me." Rousseau's voice ticked up an octave in disbelief. He took off his mirrored sunglasses, revealing dark, angry eyes. "Did you just say no to a sworn officer of the state?" "I said no." Andrew repeated his voice, still low, completely devoid of fear. "You don't have probable cause to search my property. A minor trail infraction is a citation, not a felony stop. Write me the ticket if you must and mail it to the address attached to my license plate. But you are not touching my bag." Inside the pack were the weathered, framed photographs of his fallen teammates, a folded flag, and his thermos. Personal things. Sacred things. Higgins laughed nervously. "Derek, this old guy thinks he's a lawyer. I think he's a vagrant who doesn't respect authority," Rousseau said, taking another step forward. The gap between him and Andrew was now less than 2 feet. "I'm going to tell you one last time, Grandpa. Take the bag off or I will take it off for you. And if I have to put my hands on you, you're going to be leaving these woods in zip ties." Andrew didn't move. He didn't blink. He just looked at Rousseau. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Rousseau's mind. There was something profoundly wrong with the way the old man was looking at him. It wasn't defiance exactly. It was analytical. Cold. It was the look a butcher gives a side of beef before deciding where the first cut goes. But Rousseau's arrogance quickly swallowed his instincts. He lunged forward, reaching out with a meaty hand to grab the shoulder strap of Andrew's pack. He never made contact. What happened next was so fast, neither ranger fully comprehended it until it was over. Andrew didn't strike the man. He simply shifted his weight. As Rousseau's hand came forward, Andrew's left hand shot up his thick, calloused fingers, wrapping around Rousseau's wrist. With a slight rotation of his hips and a sickeningly precise application of leverage against Russo's joints, Andrew redirected the ranger's momentum entirely. Andrew stepped aside, and Russo was suddenly violently airborne for a split second before slamming face first into the dirt and pine needles. The heavy thud knocked the wind out of the larger man instantly. Andrew hadn't even dropped his cane. He stood in exactly the same posture, looking down at the gasping ranger. "Hey!" Higgins yelled, his voice cracking in panic. He fumbled wildly at his belt, pulling out his heavy steel ASP baton and flicking it open with a loud clack. "Back away from him. Get on the ground. Get on the ground now." Andrew looked at the young, shaking ranger. "Put the stick away, son. You don't want to use that." Russo, choking on dirt and humiliated beyond belief, scrambled to his knees. His face was bright red, a mix of fury and embarrassment. "Take him down, Toby, hit him." Higgins lunged, swinging the steel baton wildly toward Andrew's shoulder. Andrew finally moved with intent. He sidestepped the clumsy swing with shocking agility for a man his age. He brought his heavy oak cane up, not to strike, but to parry. The steel baton clanged sharply against the dense wood, but as Andrew pivoted, Russo grabbed him from behind, burying his hands into the fabric of Andrew's red flannel shirt and pulling backward with all his 240-pound bulk. Andrew's balance was compromised by his bad leg. As he twisted to break Russo's grip, the old, worn flannel gave way. With a loud, violent R.I.P., the shirt tore open down the back and over the right shoulder, the buttons popping off and flying into the brush. Andrew stumbled, going down on one knee, dropping his cane. "Got you, you crazy old bastard!" Russo spat, panting heavily as he stood over Andrew, pulling his taser. Higgins stepped up, baton raised, ready to strike the kneeling old man. But as the two rangers looked down at their prey, the adrenaline in their veins suddenly turned to ice water. Andrew's torn shirt hung loosely off his frame, completely exposing his right shoulder, his upper back, and his chest. There, etched into the leathery skin of the old man, was a terrifying museum of violence. A massive, puckered starburst of scar tissue covered the front of his right shoulder, the unmistakable, devastating exit wound of a high-velocity 7.62 rifle round. Running diagonally across his ribs was a thick, jagged ridge of pink tissue, a 12-inch knife slash that looked like it had once nearly cut him in half. Scraped across his collarbone were shiny, mottled burn scars from white phosphorus. But it wasn't just the scars that made Higgins freeze, lowering his baton slowly. It was the ink. Faded but perfectly legible over Andrew's left pectoral muscle, right above his heart, was a dark tattoo. It was a golden V42 stiletto dagger, stabbing through a scroll. Higgins, whose father had served 20 years in Army intelligence, recognized it instantly. It wasn't something you bought at a parlor outside a base. It was the unofficial, highly guarded insignia of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Delta Force. Higgins took a step back, the leaves crunching loudly under his boots. His bravado vanished, replaced by a deep, primal dread. "Derek!" Higgins whispered, his voice trembling. "Derek, back up. Back away from him." Russo, blinded by rage, didn't notice. "I'm gonna light this old freak up," he hissed, aiming the taser at Andrew's back. Andrew slowly rose to his feet. He didn't pick up the cane. He didn't need it right now. The pain in his leg was entirely masked by a sudden, terrifying rush of combat-grade adrenaline. When Andrew turned around to face them, the fragile grandfather was gone. His eyes were dead black and completely locked onto Russo's throat. "You tore my shirt," Andrew whispered. The voice didn't sound human. It sounded like steel dragging across gravel. Russo's finger rested on the taser trigger, but looking into Andrew's eyes, a sudden horrifying realization washed over him. If I pull this trigger and he doesn't go down, I am going to die in these woods." The silence in the clearing was absolute, broken only by the ragged, rapid breathing of Derek Rousseau. The heavy woods of the Blood Mountain wilderness seemed to hold their breath. Andrew Scott stood completely still, his torn red flannel flapping gently in the autumn wind, the horrific tapestry of his combat scars fully exposed to the grey afternoon light. Higgins, the younger ranger, was paralyzed by a sudden freezing cocktail of awe and terror. He had grown up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, a stone's throw from Fort Bragg. His father had spent 2 decades in Army intelligence, and Higgins had spent his childhood hearing whispered, awe-struck stories about the men of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. They were the ghosts. The Tier 1 operators who did the impossible in the dark and never asked for credit. Higgins knew that the golden Vi 42 stiletto tattooed over Andrew's heart wasn't just ink. It was a warning label. "Derek!" Higgins's voice cracked a desperate, breathless plea. He holstered his steel baton and took 2 large steps backward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Derek, lower the taser. Now. I mean it. Put it down." Rousseau's jaw was clenched so tight, his teeth ground together audibly. His finger remained resting on the trigger of the yellow X-26 taser, the red laser sight dancing erratically across Andrew's exposed, heavily scarred chest. "He assaulted a state officer. Toby. He threw me to the ground. I'm going to drop this crazy old man and drag him to the cruiser." Andrew did not blink. His black, unreadable eyes remained locked on Rousseau's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer the frail, raspy tone of a weary grandfather. It was a flat, clinical baritone, the voice of a man who had orchestrated violence in a dozen different time zones. "You are holding a standard issue X-26, Andrew said, calmly taking a half-step forward. The red laser dot slid down to his stomach. "The cartridge has a 15-foot range. We are currently standing at a distance of about 5 feet. At this proximity, the 2 probes will not achieve the necessary spread to cause neuromuscular incapacitation. Furthermore, I am wearing a thick thermal underlayer beneath this torn shirt. There is an 80% probability that one or both probes will fail to penetrate the fabric and make skin contact." Rousseau swallowed hard, his bravado faltering, as the clinical breakdown of his weapon echoed in the silent woods. "If you pull that trigger and I do not go down," Andrew continued, his voice dropping a terrifying decibel, "I will cross the remaining distance in approximately 1.2 seconds. I will shatter your radial bone to remove the weapon from your hand. I will crush your trachea to prevent you from calling for backup, and I will leave you choking on your own blood in the dirt while your young partner here runs for his life. Do you understand the mathematics of your current situation, Anna Rousseau?" Rousseau's hands began to shake violently. The absolute certainty in the old man's voice wasn't a threat. It was a weather forecast. It was a guarantee of incoming devastation. "Put it down, Derek," Higgins screamed, finally breaking his paralysis. He lunged forward and slapped Rousseau's arm downward. The taser pointed safely at the forest floor. "Look at his chest, you idiot! Look at the tattoo. He's Delta. You are picking a fight with a Tier 1 operator. He will kill us both." Rousseau blinked, the red haze of his anger finally piercing enough for him to process the horrific scars, the faded ink, and the chilling realization that he had nearly signed his own death warrant over a minor trail infraction. He slowly engaged the safety on the taser and let his arm drop to his side, his chest heaving as the adrenaline left him, replaced by a cold, nauseating sweat. Andrew held his stare for 3 more seconds, ensuring the threat was entirely neutralized. Then, as quickly as the deadly operator had appeared, The old man returned. Andrew's shoulders slumped slightly. The adrenaline receded, and a sharp, familiar pain shot up his bad leg. He sighed, reaching down to retrieve his heavy oak cane from the pine needles. He pulled the torn halves of his flannel shirt together, masking the map of his violent past. "I told you, son. I just wanted to take a walk." Rousseau, utterly humiliated, but still desperate to salvage a shred of his shattered ego, pointed a trembling finger at Andrew. You're getting a citation, a massive one. I'm calling the sheriff's department. You can't just—" Before Rousseau could finish his hollow threat, the Motorola radio clipped to his shoulder, harness erupted in a burst of frantic static. "Dispatch to Unit 4. Dispatch to Unit 4. We have a Code 3 emergency. Do you copy?" Higgins immediately unclipped his radio, his hand still shaking. "Unit 4 Higgins here. Go ahead, dispatch." "Toby, we just got a panicked 911 drop from a hiker near the coordinates of the old logging camp off Sector 7. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, slipped off the upper ridge of the gorge. Caller states she fell at least 30 feet into the ravine. Major trauma. They are reporting a severe arterial bleed from her leg. We are spinning up life flight, but they are 20 minutes out, and the caller says the girl is bleeding out fast. We need you on the scene immediately. Over." Higgins went pale. "Copy, dispatch. We are about 2 miles from Sector 7. We don't have our med bags. They're in the cruiser. We're on foot. Get there, Higgins. She doesn't have 20 minutes. Rousseau froze. Sector 7 was notoriously rugged, a labyrinth of steep drop-offs and dense underbrush. Even running it would take them half an hour to navigate the terrain safely. And without medical gear, they would just be watching a child die. "We can't make it." Rousseau muttered the reality of the situation, crushing whatever ego he had left. "We're too far. Give me the grid coordinates," Andrew commanded. The 2 rangers snapped their heads toward the old man. Andrew had already unbuckled the top flap of his weathered canvas Alice pack. He reached inside and pulled out a heavy olive-drab pouch marked with a faded red cross. "The coordinates, Higgins. Now." Andrew barked, his voice snapping with unquestionable authority. "Oh, grid is roughly 34. North 83 west, near the old switchbacks," Higgins stammered. Andrew's mind processed the topography instantly. He had mapped every inch of these woods in his head over the last 20 years. "That's not 2 miles. It's 800 yards if we cut straight west through the restricted zone down the primary ridge and cross the creek." "You can't go down the primary ridge," Rousseau protested weakly. "It's a 60-degree incline. It's suicide." "It's only suicide if you don't know where to step," Andrew said, securing the medical pouch to his belt. He gripped his heavy oak cane, the wood groaning slightly under his sudden forceful weight. "Follow me, and try to keep up." Andrew didn't wait for a response. He turned and plunged directly into the thickest part of the brush, moving with a jarring, brutal efficiency. The limp that had made him look so fragile earlier was suddenly gone, replaced by a rhythmic, driving momentum. The cane was no longer a crutch. It was a third point of contact, a vaulting pole, a tool that allowed him to navigate the treacherous, uneven ground at a blistering pace. He moved through the dense forest, like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance through briars and deadfalls that snagged and tripped the 2 younger men, trailing desperately behind him. "Wait, slow down!" Rousseau gasped, slipping on wet leaves and tumbling to his knees for the second time. Andrew ignored him. His breathing was heavy, and a dull, throbbing agony radiated from his bad hip, but his mind was completely compartmentalized. He was back in the jungle. He was back in the Hindu Kush. There was a casualty. The only thing that mattered was the objective. They crested the ridge and the ground suddenly dropped away into a steep, terrifying ravine. Without hesitating, Andrew drove the steel tip of his cane deep into the dirt, grabbed a thick rhododendron branch with his free hand, and practically rappelled down the muddy incline. Higgins and Russo scrambled and slid behind him, arriving at the bottom, covered in mud and gasping for air. "Help, oh God, please, somebody help us!" The scream came from a rocky outcropping 50 yards downstream. Andrew sprinted toward the sound, the rangers staggering in his wake. They found a frantic woman kneeling over a little girl in a pink windbreaker. The child was pale, her lips tinged with blue, her eyes rolling back in shock. A jagged broken tree branch had impaled the girl's right thigh during the fall, and bright red oxygenated blood was pulsing rapidly into the dirt. "Move!" Andrew ordered, dropping to his knees beside the girl. "I tried to stop it." The mother sobbed hysterically, her hands covered in blood. "I pressed on it, but it won't stop." "You did good, Mum. I've got her now," Andrew said, his voice suddenly radiating a profound, grounding calmness. He ripped open the olive-drab pouch. Inside wasn't standard first aid gear. It was a combat trauma kit. Andrew's hands moved with blinding mechanical speed, muscle memory forged in the worst places on Earth. He pulled a combat application tourniquet cat from the pouch. Within 3 seconds, he had it looped high and tight around the girl's upper thigh. He cranked the windlass rod, twisting it brutally tight until the frantic pulsing of arterial blood came to an immediate halt. He secured the rod in the locking clip. "Higgins," Andrew barked without looking up. "Hold her shoulders. She's going to thrash when the pain hits." Higgins scrambled forward, pinning the girl's shoulders gently but firmly. Andrew grabbed a package of quick-clot combat gauze. "Russo, over here. Put your hands exactly where mine are." Russo, looking green and terrified by the amount of blood, hesitated. "Get your hands on this wound right now, Ranger," Andrew roared. Russo jolted, dropped to his knees, and pressed his hands over the deep laceration as Andrew rapidly packed the hemostatic gauze directly into the wound channel, applying massive direct pressure. "Keep holding it, don't let up," Andrew commanded Russo. For the next 15 minutes the woods were quiet, except for the ragged breathing of the rangers and the distant rhythmic thwump, thwump, thwump of an approaching medevac helicopter. Andrew sat back on his heels, his torn red shirt stained with mud and the little girl's blood. He kept a gentle, reassuring hand on the mother's shoulder, softly talking her through the shock, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. When the chopper finally hovered over the clearing, dropping a basket, and a flight medic, the scene was completely stabilized. The flight medic, a seasoned veteran himself, took one look at the perfectly applied tourniquet, the combat gauze, and the blood-soaked old man, with the Delta tattoo visible through his torn shirt. The medic gave Andrew a slow, silent nod of absolute respect before loading the girl into the basket. As the helicopter banked away toward Atlanta, the flashing lights of local law enforcement broke through the trees on the far side of the ravine. Sheriff Bill Donovan, a heavily built man with a gray mustache, trudged down the creek bed, followed by 3 deputies. "Higgins, Russo," Donovan called out. "Dispatch said you beat the chopper here. You boys saved that girl." Russo, still kneeling in the blood-stained dirt, looked up. He looked at Andrew, who was quietly picking up his cane and securing his empty medical pouch. "No, Sheriff," Higgins said, quietly stepping forward. "We didn't do anything." "He did." Sheriff Donovan turned his flashlight toward the old man. As the beam illuminated Andrew's face, Donovan's jaw dropped. "Artie!" The sheriff breathed in disbelief. "Andrew Scott, what in the hell are you doing down in the gorge? And what happened to your shirt?" "Afternoon, Bill." Andrew said, leaning heavily on his cane, the adrenaline finally leaving him, leaving behind the aching bones of an old man. I had a minor disagreement with your park rangers about trail etiquette. Then we had a medical situation. Donovan turned to Russo, his eyes narrowing dangerously. A disagreement, Russo? You better tell me you didn't put hands on this man. He was in a restricted zone, Sheriff. Russo stammered, scrambling to his feet, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. He refused a bag search. I was doing my job. Donovan let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor. He walked right up to Russo, invading his space, just as Russo had done to Andrew an hour earlier. You ignorant son of a bitch, Donovan spat. Do you have any idea who you were harassing? This is Master Sergeant Andrew Scott. He's got 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star that he got for carrying 2 of his bleeding teammates through a jungle for 3 days. He is a certified local hero, and the only reason you are standing here breathing right now is because he has more restraint in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Russo visibly shrank the weight of his arrogance, finally crushing him completely. He looked at the blood on his hands, then at the old man leaning on the cane, the man who had effortlessly disarmed him, spared his life, and then saved a child while Russo stood by uselessly. Sheriff, Andrew interrupted, his voice tired. It's been a long day. The girl is safe. Let it go. Donovan sighed, shaking his head. I'm writing a full report on this, Artie. And Russo, you're suspended pending a review. Get out of my sight. Go back to the cruiser. Russo didn't argue. He didn't puff out his chest. He just lowered his head and began the long, humiliating walk back up the ridge, followed by a silent, deeply humbled Higgins. Andrew watched them go, then turned to look up at the mountain. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows through the pines. You okay, Artie? Donovan asked softly. Need a ride back to your truck? No bill, Andrew said, adjusting his canvas pack over his torn shoulder. I've got a thermos of coffee in here, and I've got 2 friends waiting for me at the top of the ridge. I think I'll finish my walk. With a slow, rhythmic thud crunch of his heavy wooden cane, the old man turned and disappeared back into the darkening woods, leaving the quiet forest exactly as he found it. True strength isn't about wearing a badge or throwing your weight around. It's about having the power to destroy, but choosing the restraint to protect. Andrew Scott proved that the quietest men in the room are often the ones you should fear and respect the most. Never judge a book by its cover, and never underestimate the quiet veterans walking among us. If this story of respect, duty, and hidden heroism moved you, please like, share, and subscribe video.